What would you do if a teacher took scissors and hacked off your child's hair without asking? In this video, the shocking real-life story of Richard Gere's daughter, a classroom humiliation, and the explosive moment her father walked through the school doors. It started like any ordinary Wednesday. The morning sun cast long shadows through the quiet streets as the black town car pulled up in front of Cresthill Academy. Ava Gere, 10 years old and unusually mature for her age, adjusted the strap of her backpack and looked up at the ivy-covered brick facade of her school. Cresthill was a private institution with a reputation for academic excellence and a strict adherence to tradition. It was the kind of place where uniforms were ironed daily, handwriting was still graded, and discipline was a word used with pride, not caution. Ava had been attending Cresthill for almost 2 years. As the daughter of a world-famous actor, she stood out, not because she ever bragged, she didn't, but because there was a gentle calmness about her. She was introspective, artistic, and sensitive, the kind of girl who noticed when a friend seemed sad or when a bird had fallen from a nest. Her most defining physical trait was her hair, long, chestnut brown, and naturally wavy. It had been growing since she was 4, only trimmed at home, never chopped. She wore it down most days, brushed and clean, and often tied it with a blue ribbon when her mother suggested it might be more practical. To Ava, her hair was more than just hair. It was a part of her identity, a connection to her late grandmother, who had always called it your river of light. That morning, she arrived in time for her 4th-grade homeroom, quietly greeted her teacher, and took her usual seat in the second row by the window. Her classroom was like many others, poster-filled walls, maps with curled edges, and the distinct smell of dry erase markers and old textbooks. Her teacher, Mrs. Breckman, was standing near her desk, clipboard in hand. A former nun-turned-educator, Breckman had a no-nonsense demeanor and an outdated teaching style that treated children more as junior soldiers than as individuals. "Everyone line up at your desks," Mrs. Breckman announced with authority. "Time for your weekly hygiene check." The class groaned quietly. This was a strange, old-fashioned tradition, one of the many character rituals that the founders of Cresthill had deemed essential to raising proper citizens. It included checking nails, uniform neatness, and hair presentation. Most students found it awkward. Some found it humiliating. Ava, used to quietly complying, stood beside her desk like the others, arms at her sides, waiting. As Mrs. Breckman walked from student to student, she occasionally murmured corrections. "Shirt untucked, Mr. Thompson, fingernails need trimming. Miss Carter." Then she reached Ava. Her gaze lingered. Ava felt it immediately. A cold, evaluating stare that ran from her scalp to the ends of her hair, as though she were some kind of exhibit in a museum. "Miss Gere," Breckman said, voice sharp, "this is unacceptable." Ava blinked. "Ma'am, this hair is a distraction. It's unkempt, wild. It goes against our standards. I brush it every morning," Ava replied quietly. "Well, clearly not well enough." Breckman turned abruptly and walked back to her desk. Students watched silently, uncertain what to expect. Then came the moment that would change everything. She opened her drawer, pulled out a pair of dull metal scissors, and turned back toward Ava. The room stiffened. Ava's eyes widened. "Come here," the teacher said. Ava didn't move. "I said, come here." Still stunned, Ava slowly stepped forward. "Are you going to cut my hair?" she asked, voice barely audible. "You leave me no choice," Breckman answered. "But my parents didn't say you could." "You can't. You've been warned before about presentation. Now sit down." Ava hesitated. She looked around the classroom. Her classmates were silent, their eyes wide with disbelief. Her best friend Mia, sitting at the back, shook her head slightly, as if to say don't do it. But what choice did she have? Saying no to Mrs. Breckman meant detention, punishment, possibly suspension. She had never defied an adult before. So, slowly, Ava sat down at the edge of the teacher's desk. Breckman grabbed a handful of her hair and pulled it taut. Ava gasped slightly at the tug. The scissors opened. Snip! The sound was louder than it should have been. The first chunk of hair fell to the floor like a fallen petal. Ava sat paralyzed, her body tense, her eyes staring straight ahead. Another snip. Another clump hit the floor. Her classmates watched in horror. Some looked away. Others couldn't believe what they were seeing. One boy even laughed nervously, unsure of how to process the moment. The rest of the class was silent. The tension in the room was suffocating. Mrs. Breckman continued hacking away at Ava's hair, her motions careless, almost aggressive. She muttered under her breath about tidiness and discipline, as if those words justified what she was doing. Tears welled up in Ava's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She wouldn't cry in front of them. She wouldn't give Breckman that power. When it was over, her hair was uneven and jagged, the beautiful river of light reduced to a choppy mess. Mrs. Breckman stepped back and, with a tone of finality, said, "That's better." Ava got up silently and returned to her desk. She didn't look at anyone, not the teacher, not her friends. She sat down and stared at the tabletop. Her sketchbook, once her safe haven, remained closed. Lunch came and went. Ava didn't speak. She sat alone at the table, where she usually laughed and shared stories with Mia. Mia tried to come over, but Ava turned away. She didn't want comfort. She wanted to disappear. It wasn't until the final bell rang and Ava stepped into the back seat of the family's black car that she let herself exhale. The driver, a kind man named Louis who had worked with the Gere family for years, glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Miss Ava, what happened to your hair?" She didn't respond. Louis looked closer and saw her eyes, still red from holding back tears. He said nothing more, but gripped the steering wheel tighter as he drove home. At the Gere residence, a peaceful estate tucked away in the hills, Richard Gere was standing in the foyer, going over a film script. He looked up when he heard the door open. "Ava," he called. When he saw her, he froze. His daughter walked in with her backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes downcast. But it wasn't her expression that made him drop the script. It was her hair, or what was left of it. He took 2 steps forward. "Ava, what happened?" She looked up at him, and he could see the shame in her eyes. "Mrs. Breckman cut it," she whispered. "She said it was too long." She didn't ask. Richard knelt beside her, cupping her chin in his hand. He gently brushed the hair away from her face. His fingers trembled. He could see the uneven cuts, the clumsy scissor marks. This wasn't a trim. This was cruelty. "She did this at school?" he asked. Ava nodded. "In front of class?" Another nod. Richard stood slowly. His face hardened in a way Ava rarely saw. "Get your coat," he said softly. "We're going back." "Dad, it's okay," Ava said, barely believing it herself. "No, it's not," Richard replied. "No one touches you like that. No one humiliates you like that. And no one gets away with it." The car ride back to Cresthill Academy was quiet. Ava sat in the back seat, her fingers nervously twisting the ends of her ruined hair. She glanced out the window, watching the world blur past, but her thoughts were loud. Every snip, every stare from her classmates, every word from Mrs. Breckman echoed like a cruel chant. Richard sat in the front passenger seat, his face unreadable, jaw clenched, eyes fixed ahead. He hadn't spoken since telling Louis to turn the car around. Ava had seen that look before, once when someone had trespassed on their property and taken photos of her playing in the backyard. But this was different. This wasn't just about protecting her from the press. This was about something deeper, something sacred, her dignity. They pulled up to the school just before the final after-school bell rang. The parking lot was starting to empty as parents picked up their kids, unaware of what had transpired behind the school's polished doors. Richard got out of the car and opened the door for Ava. He extended a hand, and she took it, though her own was trembling. They walked side by side, her much smaller frame clinging to his like a shadow. Inside the front office, the secretary, Mrs. Adler, a longtime school employee, looked up from her computer and did a double-take when she saw Richard Gere. "Mr. Gere, is everything all right? I need to speak to Mrs. Breckman." "Now," he said firmly, though his voice remained calm. She's just finishing up her last class, I believe." "Shall I? I'll find her myself." Before she could protest, he was already striding down the main hallway, Ava walking beside him. His polished leather shoes echoed loudly against the tile. Teachers peered out of classrooms, some doing a double take at the sight of the actor, while others quickly shut their doors. No one approached him. They didn't have to. His body language said enough. Outside room 4B, the fourth grade classroom, he paused. He looked at Ava. "Are you okay to wait here?" She nodded. He opened the door. Mrs. Breckman was at her desk, tidying up papers. She looked up, startled by the unannounced entrance. "May I help? You're Mrs. Breckman?" "Yes." "Who are you?" "I'm Ava's father, Richard Gere." Recognition flickered across her face, but it didn't soften her expression. If anything, she stiffened. "Ah, yes, of course. Mr. Gere, is there something I can help you with?" He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "Yes. You can explain to me why you thought it was appropriate to take a pair of scissors and cut my daughter's hair without parental consent or any authority whatsoever." Her smile faded. "Mr. Gere, I understand you're upset, but this is a matter of school policy. We have very clear grooming guidelines, and your daughter has been warned multiple times about her noncompliance." Her hair was. "Let me stop you right there," he said, his voice low but steady. "You assaulted my daughter. You humiliated her in front of her entire class. You took something deeply personal and destroyed it as if she were a doll to be tidied up. And now you're hiding behind school policy." She stood straighter. "We have rules here for a reason. Uniformity. Discipline. No one is above them. I didn't raise my daughter to be above rules," he said. "But I also didn't send her here to be treated like she's beneath basic human decency. You cut a child's hair, not just a few inches. You butchered it." She was warned. Her parents were notified. "Wrong," he said sharply. "I wasn't notified. My wife wasn't notified. There are no voicemails, no emails, no letters. Nothing. And even if there had been, what gives you the right to physically alter my child without her or our consent?" For the first time, Mrs. Breckman seemed unsure. She shifted her weight slightly. "In my experience." "In your experience," Richard interrupted, "you should have known better than to use your position of authority to bully a child into submission. I've met dictators with more self-restraint." She looked offended, but Richard didn't care. He took a breath and stepped closer, just enough to make his presence undeniable but not threatening. "I don't care if she had hair down to her ankles. You don't touch her. You don't make an example out of her. And you certainly don't traumatize her under the guise of discipline. I was simply enforcing standards." "You humiliated her," Richard said, his voice sharp now, laced with fury, "in front of her peers. In a moment she will never forget. That's not enforcement. That's abuse." There was silence. "Do you have children, Mrs. Breckman?" he asked suddenly. She blinked. "No, I know." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe that's why you can't understand what you've taken from her today. But let me make one thing very clear. You will never come near my daughter again. As of this moment, she's no longer under your instruction. You can't dictate her class placement. I can, and I will. I'll be speaking to the headmaster next." He turned toward the door, then paused. "I hope you understand the severity of what you've done, because the school board will. And if they don't, the media certainly will." Her eyes widened slightly, and she opened her mouth to respond, but he didn't wait. He stepped out of the classroom. Ava was still standing there, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's finish this." They made their way down to the administrative offices, where the headmaster, Dr. Ellington, had just finished a meeting. The secretary quickly buzzed them through, and Richard didn't hesitate to walk into the man's office. Dr. Ellington was a tall, silver-haired academic with a calm demeanor, but even he looked taken aback at the sight of Richard Gere storming into his office, daughter in tow. "Mr. Gere, to what do I owe?" Richard gestured to Ava. "Look at her." Ellington stood. His eyes moved to Ava's hair, now clearly uneven and butchered. He blinked. "What happened?" "Your teacher happened," Richard said coldly. "She took scissors to my daughter's hair without consent. In class. In front of everyone." Ellington's jaw tensed. "Mrs. Breckman did this?" "Yes. And I want to know what this school plans to do about it." Ava sat quietly in one of the chairs while her father explained the entire incident, step by step. Ellington listened, occasionally scribbling notes, but mostly just absorbing the shock. "This is completely unacceptable," the headmaster finally said. I On behalf of the school, Mr. Gere, I offer my sincerest apology. I had no idea. You shouldn't have had to, Richard said. There should be safeguards in place to prevent this kind of thing. My daughter should have been protected, not violated. I agree, Ellington said firmly. Mrs. Breckman will be placed on immediate administrative leave while we investigate this incident. I assure you, this behavior is not in line with our institution's values. She shouldn't be around children at all, Richard said. Understood, the headmaster said. Richard looked down at Ava. Would you like to go home, sweetheart? She nodded. I'll have someone follow up with you directly, Ellington said. And again, I'm deeply sorry. Richard gave him a curt nod and led his daughter out of the office. As they walked through the hallway, students and teachers still whispered behind their backs. But Ava held her head a little higher now. Not because the pain was gone. It wasn't. But because her father had believed her, stood up for her, and made sure the world knew what had happened wasn't okay. When they stepped outside, the sun was just beginning to set, casting golden light across the campus. Richard opened the car door for her and gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. We'll fix this, he said softly. All of it. Ava leaned into him, finally letting her tears fall. And for the first time all day, she felt safe. The following morning, Ava stayed home. The household was unusually quiet for a weekday. No driver waited at the curb. No school bag by the door. Instead, Ava sat at the breakfast table, slowly stirring her oatmeal, the television in the background playing a muted wildlife documentary. She wore a hoodie, the hood up, hair tucked in, not out of comfort but concealment. Richard sat across from her, sipping coffee, his phone face down on the table. He hadn't left her side since yesterday. While Ava hadn't spoken much since they returned from the school, something in her body language had shifted. She no longer looked like she was bracing for another blow. She looked like she was beginning to believe she wouldn't have to. That morning, Richard made two important calls. First, he contacted the family's attorney, not for publicity, not even for vengeance, but to ensure there was an official record of what had happened, a paper trail, a message that said, "We saw this. It mattered, and it won't happen again." The second call was to his publicist. "I'm not interested in sensationalism," he told her. "But if we don't say something, someone else will." And indeed, by that afternoon, someone had. A student's parent had shared an anonymous tip with a local education blog. A teacher forcibly cut a celebrity child's hair in front of the class, it read. Everyone saw it. Kids are talking. Parents are furious. Within hours, bigger outlets picked it up. Most didn't name the student, but some made the connection. Richard Gere's daughter subjected to harsh punishment at elite private school, one headline read. Act of discipline or abuse? Asked another. By day's end, the story had gone viral. The school issued a public statement. Cresthill Academy is investigating a recent incident involving a staff member and a student. We are committed to ensuring a safe, respectful learning environment for all our students. It was a sanitized, rehearsed response, and Richard knew it. He didn't care for their PR tone. He wasn't interested in optics. He cared about accountability. That night, he sat on the living room couch beside Ava, remote in hand. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "would you be okay if I made a statement to the press? I won't use your name. I'll keep it respectful, but I want the world to know what happened to you isn't okay." Ava thought for a moment. Then, surprising both of them, she nodded. Yes, and so he did. In a heartfelt message shared across his verified accounts, Richard wrote, "As a father, I believe in kindness, dignity, and the right of every child to feel safe at school. Yesterday, my daughter had a piece of her identity forcibly taken from her. Her hair, yes, but also her agency. A teacher cut her hair without permission, in front of classmates, without warning. Discipline should never humiliate. Correction should never shame. This isn't about policy. It's about respect. And we, as parents, must hold institutions accountable when they fail to protect our children." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of comments poured in. Parents, educators, celebrities. People shared similar stories. Stories of teachers who overstepped, schools that ignored them, and children who carried quiet trauma. But there were also messages of support for Ava. Young girls from all over the world posted photos with uneven ponytails and jagged trims, using the hashtag hair for Ava. They called her brave. They told her she wasn't alone. The next morning, Richard showed Ava some of the posts. "Look at this one," he said, handing her the phone. A girl from Sweden had posted a photo of herself holding scissors and a lock of her own hair. The caption read, "Ava, you're beautiful with or without your long hair. No one can take away your shine." Ava smiled for the first time in days. Back at Cresthill, the impact was being felt. The headmaster, Dr. Ellington, called an emergency meeting with faculty and staff. The board of directors, now under the scrutiny of a furious, global public, demanded swift action. Parents sent dozens of emails demanding accountability. Within 72 hours, Mrs. Breckman was placed on permanent administrative leave, pending review, and then quietly retired. The school framed it as mutual separation, but everyone knew why it happened. More importantly, the school formally revised its grooming policies and eliminated all public appearance checks. New guidelines were drafted emphasizing consent, dignity, and positive discipline. All staff were required to attend mandatory trauma-informed teaching workshops. Richard, despite his fame, refused to turn this into a media tour. He declined all talk shows and interviews. But he did attend a private town hall organized by the school board. There he spoke, not as an actor, but as a father. Rules without empathy create fear, he told the audience of staff, board members, and parents. Schools must be places of learning, not punishment. If a child can't feel safe walking into a classroom, you haven't built a school. You've built a system of quiet harm. There was no applause, but there didn't need to be. The silence in the room said enough. Back at home, Ava began a slow return to herself. She took a break from Cresthill with the school's blessing and began attending a small creative learning center nearby, one with no uniforms and a garden classroom. There, she was allowed to paint, write poetry, and express herself freely. Richard took time off from filming to be present, picking her up from classes, walking her through the park, and helping her pick out a new haircut from a stylist who specialized in restorative trims. Together, they went to the salon. The stylist, a soft-spoken woman named Carla, knelt down and spoke to Ava directly. "You get to decide what happens to your hair," she said. "Not me, not your dad, not anyone else." Ava looked at her dad, who nodded. "Whatever you want," he said. Ava thought for a moment, then smiled. "Can we keep the sides long and shape the top? Maybe with a little wave?" "You got it," Carla said. When it was done, Ava stared at herself in the mirror. She looked different, stronger. Not because the cut changed her, but because she had chosen it. Weeks passed, and though the incident faded from public discourse, its impact stayed with them. One afternoon, Ava and Richard were sitting on the porch, watching the wind dance through the trees. Ava was sketching birds, something she hadn't done since before the haircut. "Dad," she asked suddenly. "Yeah. Do you think Mrs. Breckman really thought she was helping me?" Richard took a long breath. "I think some people confuse control with care. They think that fixing someone means changing them. But real care means helping someone grow into who they are, not who you want them to be." Ava nodded. "I don't hate her. I just wish she saw me." "She will now," Richard said. "Because you didn't disappear. You stood your ground. That takes more strength than most adults have." Ava smiled and went back to her sketching. Later that year, at her new school, she wrote a short story for a writing contest. It was called The Girl with the Ribbon. It was about a girl who loses her hair but finds her voice. She didn't use her own name, but everyone who read it knew who it was about. She won first place. Richard framed the story and hung it in his study. Not because it was about what happened, but because it was proof of what came next. Growth, strength, grace, and most of all, healing.